Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse Podcast. Hope you brought your questions. We have brought some answers, and we're going to try to match them up.
Ooh, that could be fun.
Yes.
Yeah, just put them all in a hat.
It's a twist. We've done the Jeopardy thing. This is the next logical step.
Yep. Now we've got all four carnivorans present at this point. We've got Maddie has just entered the room. There
Hello,
she
Maddie.
is.
Welcome.
There she is. And all three cats arguing over cream in the background. All right. We will start with 4 questions from last week's episode 63. Climate models aren't as bad as you say. There is physical conservation. Same models are used for weather forecasts. Some parameterizations are iffy. So I included this because I was surprised that we were understood to be claiming that climate models were bad across the board. We are absolutely 100% not.
Yes. What they are is iffy. And what we have said, I will take responsibility for this. What I have said is that they are fine as the generators of hypotheses. They are not in and of themselves tests of anything. And so, yes, some of the models are liable to be quite good. The question is which ones and how do you know and what do you do with things like the uncertainties surrounding cloud models and the what we discussed last week with respect to the negative feedback that might arise from increased ocean depths resulting in greater pressure that holds methane clathrates frozen in the Arctic. And so in any case, what you do, if you've got a model and you think it's good, is you test what it says rather than use it as a test.
Yeah. And actually, I meant to read these two together from the same person. He says, Seeger et al. 2019 showed in Science that there was an ENSO bias in all climate models, ENSO being the El Nino Southern Oscillation. The field is not captured. There's plenty of disagreeable mathematicians, which I'm sure. So yeah, I don't know. I did not go and find that paper, but just continuing on with the same.
Yeah, but field is not captured. It's not that simple. There is pressure to not deviate. In other words, we can see, because of what happens when we as non-climate scientists say that we have skepticism about any part of what we hear from climate science, we get pushback.
Yeah.
To believe that that pushback does not exist inside of a field that believes that the future of the world rests on whether or not people accept what it says, it results in an artificial consensus. And so that has to not be the case if people are to trust what's being said from a field, and the perverse incentives are there, as they are in every other field. It's just that the danger is greater in this one.
Yeah. Next question. In terms of cultural evolution, could wokeness be an environmental stressor which serves to strengthen enlightenment values in society?
If we survive. Yeah, of course.
Intermediate levels of disturbance is what we're shooting for.
Right. I mean, look, I think, our joking answers here are exactly right, which is to say...
my joking in-group, models of explanations for the latitudinal diversity gradient answer. Yes.
Well, so all of these things are correct. Yes, of course, wokeness could force us to grapple with our values and could cause us to bring a whole new generation online with the reasons that those values are so important. How would it do that? By jeopardizing those values so that people registered their loss. So yes, of course it could. And the question is,
and that is part of what, that is part of what it presumably explains at least some of the pendulum swing between sets of values, is that people don't notice the erosion of them until they, and everyone has some different straw that broke the camel's back, some different moment at which like, oh, wait, I cannot do that thing. And people before me were complaining about these other things that I didn't care about. Now it's hit something that I care about. I can see it. Now I'm paying attention.
So the potential is there, but if you think about things like this equity stuff, equity in the Bailey form, the more aggressive version of the argument, that is not a viable basis for a system. We will destroy functional institutions attempting to do that. That is to say, any school, any business that signs up for this in lieu of a system of merit will suffer in its quality and it will fail relative to competitors that don't sign up for this. So you don't need to run the experiment to discover that. What could you destroy if you decide, well, we're going to need to see that for ourselves before we accept that that version of equity doesn't work? You could destroy the West. You could put China or Russia or who knows who in a unrivaled position in the world. This is an extremely dangerous game to play in order to rediscover values whose basis was well understood and captured in literature and discussions at the time. So, education is not the solution to everything, but at the very least, we ought to educate ourselves on what is understood about why these are our values, how we arrived here, and why they need to be protected, rather than run the experiment of uninventing all of them to see why, so that we can rediscover them.
Right. And final question from last week. Oh, boy, I put this on here and then I hadn't considered it until just now, so I'm not sure what the answer is going to be. What are you personally not doing that goes against your better nature in the context of your biology education? And why not?
Wait. What are you personally not doing that goes against your better nature in the context of your biology education? And why not?
Like, what do we know would be good for us? I think, given what we know about biology and evolution, and we're behaving in ways that are opposite.
I think.
Like I said,
I don't think we have a viable alternative, which is why it's not a live question for us. But I think it's perfectly clear that the internet, its algorithms and processes are dangerous to the quality of thought, and that we would be wise to come up with a rigorous and regimented isolation mechanism. We would be healthier. Frankly, it'd probably be smarter just to walk away from the whole thing than to engage it as it is. That said, our family's livelihood depends entirely on interacting, and it wouldn't, frankly, I don't think, be fair to people who are getting something valuable out of this. So I feel like we know it's bad for us, but we don't have a choice, and that's not entirely irrational.
Okay. I think I have two generic answers that will be true for many, many of the people watching. And so I think there's something perhaps that can be learned from thinking about both of them, which is, not actually doing heart pumping exercise as much as you say you want to and do want to, and always feel better afterwards, and usually feel great while you're doing it even. But the sort of activation energy required to get suited up and out the door, whatever it is, depending on what the activity is, can be too high, such that you don't do as much. In the winter, like this year, you were actually going out on your bike a fair bit. And there have definitely been winters when you haven't, and I'm not doing it this winter. And this thing that our brains tell ourselves in advance of hard work, that it's easier, which it is, to just stay where you are, is a kind of privileging of short-term comfort over long-term benefit, and teaching yourself to actively remember, especially like engage in activity and sport and thrill, whatever it is that you actually love. And if you just hate moving your body, I don't know what to tell you. But find. And I even hate the word exercise, right? Like, find some athletic enterprise that you really do thoroughly enjoy. And there's certainly benefit, tons of benefit in walking, but I'm specifically talking about the kind of thing that you're going to come back and you don't need to shower to feel comfortable. Like, you're not going to want to just get into bed after doing this because you're going to be sweaty. And that kind of work, I think for actually most of us, actually feels amazing. And afterwards, you feel much better, and those benefits, continue for days. Even if you're doing it every day or almost every day, and yet it's very easy to get out of the habit because it's more comfortable to sit around.
So I want to add two things to that.
Yeah.
One, what usually happens when I stop doing it over the winter
Mhm.
is I do it pretty regularly until I get sick somewhere.
Mhm.
And, this was a much bigger problem when we were teaching college students and they would bring everything through the door and our kids were in daycare. And so we got exposed
There was
to
like
it.
6 or 7 years there where we were both teaching college students and our kids were in daycare, and there was just no
Yeah,
avoiding the
kids got
pathogens.
many
Yeah.
colds and sometimes worse.
Yeah.
And that, when you're knocked off of this pattern for a couple of weeks, or if there's a particularly bad spate of weather so that,
Mhm.
it's not safe to ride your bike because there's ice on the roads or something.
Right.
And then you try to go back to it, it's very hard to do. And so in some ways this winter has been better because we haven't been passing the regular colds around.
Yeah, we're not sick.
Which I think we're not paying attention to it because we're paying attention to COVID, but we societally ought to be paying attention to how much better we are doing on many of these other pathogens, and we ought to figure out what the lesson of that is. The other thing I wanted to say here, though, is this is a place where our biology is upending us because our novel circumstances don't match our ancestral circumstances, essentially the subject of our book. But the point is this. Your ancestors, almost all of them were starving almost all of the time. Doesn't mean they never had adequate food, but the point is, to the extent that there's excess food, populations tend to grow, and that means that they're self-limiting. So what that also implies is that any food you don't have to source because you are able to not spend the calories is to your advantage, which is why we are so sensitive to it being chilly. It's not that there's anything bad about it being chilly. In fact, It's probably good for you if you have unlimited food. But we are constantly in this mode of trying to save every calorie because essentially at some point those calories are the difference between life and death. And we're programmed to save them now so that we have them then. And that totally miswires us for our own physiology, which accumulates fat and all of these other things where wouldn't it be wonderful if instead of feeling, some sort of trepidation and resistance to going out and doing amazing exercise that we know is good for us, we were wired to be enthusiastic about going out the door, especially if it's cold. That would be the way, if we could self-reprogram in order to do these things, we'd be better off. But we're up against programming that occurred in an ancestral environment we no longer live in. And so yes, we know it would be better to go out and do vigorous exercise more, but we, like everybody else, are up against our own ancestral programming, which is just out of phase with the present.
Yeah, no, that's very good. The other thing I will say is that despite my ever greater certainty that these two things are just not healthy for us to be ingesting, I continue to eat sugar and drink alcohol. And I love to bake and have a sweet tooth, and both of us, I think you have an easier time resisting sugar. Although now that I bake gluten free, it's harder for you when I make delicious things. And both of us drink, and I am particularly compelled that alcohol just is not healthy. It's just not good for us. And I say that neither of us have ever thought or had anyone else say, you've got a drinking problem. It's not like that. It just, I can just feel, much as after you do, rigorous exercise, you feel better. Your body is just more flexible and mobile, and just everything about it is functioning better. After, right after a drink or two, you feel looser, and it's nice. My German Irish background, I don't tend to get hungover, but I always feel like less sharp and less capable for a little bit in the morning the next day if I've had a drink or two the night before. So again, it's about prioritizing short term over long term.
Yeah, and in fact, we have experimented quite a bit with foregoing alcohol for periods of time. And one of the things one discovers is that it takes a long time for, 5 o'clock to hit and for it not to occur to you to maybe have a drink. But if you can get through the 5 minutes where it occurs to you, maybe I would have a drink.
Just forget.
You forget. Yeah. And so it's really a very short-term thing you're responding to. So in any case, that's another, those are good examples.
All right. The question from the Discord server this week is, how do we come back to shared reality together when it seems record numbers of people are suffering from mass delusional conspiracy thinking on both sides of the political spectrum?
Well, the real question is, who wants us involved in these massive conspiracies, and how are they convincing us to think this way? All right, that was irony. Sorry. I'm back. Yes. Well, here's the problem, I think, really, is that the unprecedented complexity of our informational environment and the collapse of the structures that are supposed to help us make sense of it have resulted in a kind of sense vacuum. And conspiratorial thinking is natural because conspiracies are real. They happen. They're not uncommon. And therefore, speculation about what might be the result of them is not novel. It's ancient. So the real question is, are there conspiracies? Yeah, lots of them. Most conspiracy hypotheses, wrong. That's automatic, just as most hypotheses about anything will be wrong. So how, especially in the neighborhood of conspiracy, does one exert some kind of quality control? And it's not simple, because the rules that allow you to sort truth from fiction under regular, let's say, scientific circumstances don't apply, because a conspiracy will, by definition, try to create an explanation for something that is false in order to cover the true explanation. It's inherent.
Yeah.
So we need to do better about this. I will say I am in conversation with somebody that I'm hoping to put on the podcast soon, who I regard as an expert in this topic, and we will talk about it.
Excellent. I guess I will also say that we are trying to model some of what we do in order to detect and assess possible conspiracy hypotheses in our midst, and information that comes in. Often it's information that comes in as if it is 100% true, and then it turns out that there is a motivation behind the person who's feeding it to you. So, it's at some level you can't do absolutely everything in your life like this. I remember when we were in our 20s, and really trying to resist just about all of the received wisdom entirely. And I remember at one point we were like grocery shopping together and standing like in front of the paper towels going, what kind of paper towels should we buy? And it occurred to me, like, this is what brand loyalty is for on the positive side. Like, just you need some things in your life that you can set and forget, right? That you can just be like,
I've made this choice already. I don't remember what it's
about. I made the choice.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It's not that important to me, right? Yeah. And it's really important to the 8 companies who are vying for my dollars. But once I've made one, just it doesn't matter anymore, right? And of course, the brands themselves make that difficult because they change it up. Like, I'd love that for the shoes that I wear. Just like, let me just buy the same shoes that I bought 2 years ago to walk around. Oh, they don't exist anymore. Oh, they're only in that hideous color. Oh my God. Like, why do I have to rethink this again? Like, I actually really don't want to have to rethink most of my buying decisions over and over and over again. But with regard to intellectual stuff, there's almost nothing that you can safely set and forget. You actually have to say for almost anything coming in, once you trust people, and this is actually something that we both used to say in our classrooms, that I would say on the very first day. I'm up here, I've got the degree that allows me to be a college professor, and you guys are all paying tuition, and you should not trust me on that basis. I will be writing your narrative evaluations at the end of the quarter rather than grades, but maybe you don't come, I have to earn your respect and your trust. And if I fail to do that, you shouldn't stay in this classroom. You shouldn't, go into the field with me. You should not pretend to be learning from me, which is in fact what most students are doing at every level, is kind of, ticking off boxes and nodding when they're supposed to nod and regurgitating stuff. And they go to the next class. And if it's like postmodernism and then physics, well, they're at complete odds with one another. And they're pretending in one or the other, or maybe sometimes both of them, and just playing the how do I satisfy this teacher game. And it's what a lot of us have begun to do with our media as well. So being extremely skeptical of everything that comes in, coming coming to trust and respect some voices that still will make errors, but that you don't have to apply the same level of skepticism at all times too, is a way to shortcut a little bit of it. But really, whenever claims are made like masks don't help, or the vaccines are safe, the data say so, and trust the science. Well, no, that's actually not how science works. And you've just given me an indication that I now need to go back and figure out what it is that you're basing that on. And oh wow, that was political, not scientific at all. Now what do I do?
Yeah, you got to do your own work. Anybody who's robbed a bank or a stagecoach knows that masks work. All right. You're feeling a little shortchanged at my response.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
The next, so finally, before we get to questions from today, there was a second Discord question, which is just a suggestion that I said I would read aloud. Please record a nature walk where you discuss whatever interesting things you see. Or to make it into a question, why ain't you doing this already?
Yeah. Well, I don't think we have not experimented very much with live streaming over cellular.
Well, I say record. I'm not sure. Well,
Yeah,
it wouldn't have to be live streamed.
Yeah.
It would be recorded either way.
But how awful to have your nature walk built around. I mean, I'm not saying there's not a purpose to it, and we could do it specially, but
I guess also, so we've specifically talked about doing trips, like taking people into nature, specifically the kind of deep nature we've spent a lot of time in, where we have access that, if you just buy a trip to the Amazon, once that is possible again, most times you don't actually get into anything that's really the Amazon. It's like on the map, it kind of looks like it is, but you don't actually get anywhere close, and it's really disrupted and, beyond secondary, it's like little forest fragments. But what I used to teach people how to be animal behaviorists, and I, unlike, everyone else at these remote field stations that I would take people to, would be like, you must go out alone. You absolutely must go out alone because just, you have to be, in order to be safe, you have to have a buddy. It's like, I haven't brought anyone here who I don't trust, and you need to tell someone when you're leaving and do all the backcountry safety things, of course. But if you go out with someone else and you're trying to actually observe animals doing what they're doing, even if you know that that's what you're trying to do and you really have your heart in it and you're really trying to do that, we are social creatures and we will end up talking, even just a little bit, even in subdued voices. And as soon as you talk, the animals become cryptic and either flee or just become cryptic in place, and they don't do anything anymore. So, if what you're looking for is lemon ants in the Amazon, for instance, or Socratea, like, the walking palm or something. If you're looking for plants or ants, you can talk through it. But if you're looking for anything charismatic, you actually have to be totally quiet. And so talking about what you see is going to make what you see much less because it will be scared off. Potentially recording and then talking afterwards about what was recorded is a possibility.
Yeah. There are things you could do. I also feel like it's not as possible right here in Portland as it should be. We have, I would say, lots of natural space around us, but it's amazing how overtaken it is with English ivy and what a big impact that has on.
I'm doing what I can.
I know you're. It's a big state.
Yes, I am doing what I can, just very, very locally, but it's a big project.
But English ivy here in California, not everywhere, but some places, a massive problem with eucalyptus. And the thing is, the effect that this has on all of the creatures is profound. This is really a under-recognized ecological catastrophe. Biologists are aware, but I think others are, they see green space and they think it's nature. And in fact, in many cases, what you have is one species or a couple of species disrupting what would otherwise be there at levels that are hard to appreciate unless you saw it happen.
Most Portlanders, I think, who spend any time in nature know that English ivy is a scourge, and they'll recognize it when they see it. But I have a very hard time looking at a landscape that's got English ivy visible in it and not just sort of feeling the absence of what should be there. And as you know, I've cleared, we bought a piece of property that was nearly covered, and I've been, doing a little bit every week. And when I've cleared trees and both species of huckleberries and sword ferns, and then we've been here a couple years now, so I've been able to see just.
You have cleared the huckleberry of the ivy.
Right, sorry, when I've cleared trees and 2 species of huckleberry and sword ferns of the ivy, you can actually see, not for the trees right away, but you can see for the understory stuff, their response really almost immediately. Like it's almost being able to do plant behavior, which sounds ridiculous, but we've got, for instance, just a red huckleberry, deciduous huckleberry right off our deck, that's actually huge now, and it was so bowed down under ivy that you couldn't tell, and it didn't fruit at all. And I uncovered that maybe a year and a half ago now, and last year it put out a lot of leaf, and I'm hoping we get flowers this year, which means seed set and fruits by next summer. And it was just about the ivy. It was just about it being buried under this invasive species.
Yeah, and there's so many places where eucalyptus is it's not one species, but is the clade that is causing the devastation. The Andes are completely screwed up by eucalyptus, which was brought in because it makes a very fine kind of lumber, but anyway, it's an invasive that gets away from people who are cultivating it. So
same thing, looking at across Andean landscapes, like, it's eucalyptus. It's like looking into Portland forest. I'm seeing ivy, I'm not seeing Portland forest. I'm seeing eucalyptus, I'm not seeing Andean landscapes.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. All right. First question from last hour. It looks like this is in 3 parts, but I'm not sure it's 3 questions. If science research is publicly funded, how will you prevent its gaming, capture, and corruption? Would this not simply create an official ministry of truth and another tool for government to oppress people? Trust the experts or else. Actually, that's okay. So that's one question, and the next 2 are 2 different questions. Okay.
Yeah, I think the idea, this is too simple. You're not going to publicly fund it and suddenly have it be clean. There's a culture of corruption in which people who don't even know that it's what they're doing are trying to figure out what the viewpoints are that are remunerative. And so, that corruption is throughout the system, and public funding is not a solution in and of itself. What you need is an incentive structure where you are rewarded for being correct and farsighted over the long term. Right? If you do that, then people will compete to discover what's true. But in isolation, public funding won't do it. It's one piece of a much larger solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot more to say on that, but let's move on. I feel that automated unemployment is another individual versus collective action problem. New job sectors won't help the veteran truck driver, for instance, who knows nothing else and can't be retrained because of Moore's law. Science and the arts will be oversaturated, driving wages down. And what happens in our brave new world when the robots build, design, and repair themselves? I'd say utopia, if not for the Calhoun experiments. Crisis? ? I don't know what the Calhoun experiments are.
Oh, I think I do.
Okay. But it doesn't matter for this.
Well, yeah, I don't think it's necessary. Let's see if Mouse Utopia shows up. Yep. So these are circumstances where mouse colonies were given everything a mouse could want, and they became absurd and self-destructive. And
the mice did.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, and this is part of the logic in this question, or pair of questions, is in part what underlies Game B style thinking, or what we've called Fourth Frontier, which is that if you follow our current trajectory to its logical conclusion, it will result in tremendous paradoxes, like large fractions of the population being unnecessary for the continuance of society, and therefore one needing either some sort of massive program to replace what would have been their wages, or the acceptance of them as outside of the economy in some way, homeless or otherwise.
Yeah.
So the basic point is, look, this got us so far, but we're about to run off the end of the tape. The logic has come to its natural end, and we have to replace this with something in which either we redirect how the economy pays you and for what, so that it pays you for things that you can actually do that enhance the well-being of society, or we have to decouple your, let's say, well-being at the wealth level from your productivity as a worker. Right? That was not initially what human beings were about, and it doesn't have to be that way permanently, but you have to do something. If you just simply imagine that this system is great because look what it did for us, and then you continue to play this game, it will result in huge paradoxes and tremendous amounts of unnecessary misery.
Fabulous. I mean, excellent answer.
Oh, so you like unprecedented misery, huh?
Yeah, that's what I like. Yep. That's what I said. You heard it here first. The Washington establishment has reasserted its ugly head while strengthening its ties to big tech, challenging the official narrative and invites censorship. Are we going to look more like China in 4 to 8 years?
You want to be careful with that last conclusion.
Right. That's the leap there. I mean, I agree with the first two parts.
I would say we are going to reinvent some of the things that China does in one way in a very different way. And in fact, we already are, right? So the big tech, whether it knows it or not, is creating an alternative social credit system that will be used and abused in ways that I believe are every bit as frightening as what China is already doing. Yep. And does that mean we will look more like China? No, it could be that we look very different. We could look as different as communism and fascism look from each other. On the other hand, two authoritarian systems do have an analogy between them, and so let's not be so precise that we miss what's actually going to occur.
Yes. With Biden rejoining the Paris Agreement, canceling the Keystone pipeline, XL pipeline, and reversing Arctic drilling rights, that too, could we not say, planetary triage-wise, that we definitely have the much lesser of two evils in the seat? Love you too. Yes, assuming that we don't get into a global war. And I think Biden's more likely to get us into that situation, which could obviously destroy everything. But certainly with regard to environmental protections that are bigger than just the U.S. even, lesser of two evils. Yeah, I'd go with that.
I'm not ready to do that. And the reason, look, there are lots of things about a Biden administration that are going to be better. They just simply are, right? The pettiness is likely to be gone. The chances of a completely out of left field strategic blunder that stumbles us into something unforeseen is probably lower. On the other hand, the chances
intentional war is more likely.
Unintentional
war has gone down. Presumably.
Intentional war is more likely. The undermining of the fundamental American values on which our system depends by kowtowing to woke ideology actually has an almost unlimited potential downside. Right? If you take America apart by playing Americans off against each other so that they don't go after elites, then what is likely to happen is going to unseat the United States from its position of global power, which leaves a vacuum that could be filled by China, Russia, some combination thereof, some new emerging power. And the danger of that to all of the values that you would point to the Paris Agreement, the Keystone XL pipeline, Arctic drilling, etc., the net effect could be negative. And so I think the lesser evil paradigm is just simply broken. It is not game theoretically stable. In other words, it becomes a weapon that keeps you in line by supplying you an ever more corrupt regime and getting you to vote for it because there's something even scarier on the outside. So, that's one thing, but it also is not complex systems aware, right? That lesser evil could be the thing that actually undoes the system. Whereas, despite the dangers of it, things that are not party to that lesser evil, trading back and forth of power, may be the route out, and I don't like either mode, but I would just say you can't do the net analysis and know where you are. You can say that there are some things that this administration is much less likely to do, as far as putting us in danger, and there are other things that it is almost certainly more likely to do.
Next question. Would you please consider reaching out to Yaron Brook regarding capitalism? Recently, on your appearance with Zuby, you said things about capitalism that, according to my understanding, was a mischaracterization of capitalism. I don't totally know who Yaron Brook is.
I do. I'm willing to talk to Yaron Brook, but I also think that this is, I think what I've said about capitalism is that I reject challenges to it because it is ill-defined. And to the extent that anybody is challenging capitalism and meaning to challenge the role of markets, I think they're dead wrong. The fact is, markets are the most powerful tool we have to discover solutions, but that the problem is that we put them not only in charge of figuring out how to do things, which they're very good at, but we also put them in charge of figuring out what to do, which they are absolutely appalling at. So I think that formulation is right. I'm open to having it challenged, and I'm certainly, ready to listen and respond to that challenge. As to whether or not I have just defended or attacked capitalism, I don't care.
Yeah.
The analysis is what's important, and I don't have a dog in the fight either way with respect to that term.
Great. I'm curious about schools being forced to move away from dress codes as they are sexist or slut-shaming. Is there a valid reason to have a dress code in an educational environment? So I think the first part of this sentence means schools can't use, are being forced away from dress codes because the dress codes are claimed to be sexist or slut-shaming.
Yep,
right. That this is this is sort of a third wave feminist interpretation of what a dress code does, which is it puts the burden on the would-be victim of being observed and possibly groped and all of this, as opposed to putting the responsibility firmly on the boys who would be doing the observing.
Well, I think there's more to it than that. I think the claim is that more provocative clothing is endemic to certain populations and not others, and therefore the burden of a dress code falls harder on oppressed people.
Well, that's a different thing.
Right.
This is about sexism and slut-shaming. This is about the male-female dynamics, is what this question is about. What you're talking about is adding the intersectional bit around oppressed classes, basically socioeconomic class, and often which is correlated with race.
Yeah.
Right. So that is also one of the reasons that is trotted out for abandonment of dress codes, I believe, but it's not what this one is. This is about basically girls should be able to a caricature of the point is girls should be able to wear whatever they want, including almost nothing at all. And if boys look, that's on them, because none of this is inherently sexualized. It's the act of looking by the boys that sexualizes female body parts, which is a stupid position.
Mm-hmm. It's nonsense. I mean, it's nonsense right down to the biologically factual nonsense, in light of female body parts that males are fond of being evolutionary displays of
sexually selected, unique to humans, all of this.
Yep.
Yeah. So is there a valid, to get to the second part of the question, is there a valid reason to have a dress code in an educational environment? Yeah. Absolutely. I say that as someone who never had one and whose children have never had them. And you didn't.
I went to one school in which there was a dress code, but it was not onerous. There was no uniform.
Yeah. It just prevented some kind
shirts
of
with collars, that kind of thing.
yeah.
Um,
And so, it hasn't become personal for us ever. And I think it would have felt, frankly, for me, I think I would have had to contend with it more deeply if it had been our kids rather than if I had just sort of been slotted into a situation where I found myself with a dress code, given I didn't really care much about clothes as a kid. I'm like, okay, as long as I don't have to wear a skirt, and actually, but that is the kind of dress code that a lot of, at least, religious schools would have imposed, potentially, which effectively limits activity. That those sorts of dress codes, where like girls have to wear skirts and boys have to wear like suits and ties, actually limits physical activity and does reinforce traditional gender norms, especially with regard to skirts for girls, where you can't do, you're not going to play upside down in the jungle gym if you're wearing a skirt, right? So those sorts of things are regressive, but basically asking for a certain amount of coverage, so it can be easier for everyone to focus on what it is that they are in school to do academically, as opposed to on the social aspects of it. I think I could make an argument for that. I've not ever tried exactly, but I think there's one to be made.
Well, I'd go a little bit further, even that there's something to neutralizing the effort that goes into competing, via clothing. And, there's certainly something to be said for self-expression, but the idea that you're going to go to school and this is not an issue for anybody because it's against the rules for everybody, you're all wearing the same thing. I think is probably, as much as that seems kind of old world, I think there's a strong argument for it because
it obscures class differences. Right. If you're at some school that requires a dress code and you've got whatever, 2 of them, like regardless of whether or not that's all you got in your closet at home, you come to school looking the same way as the kid whose family has a boat. Right. It potentially does begin to get at equalizing the playing field.
Yep. No, it's it does equalize it in a way that I think is important. Now, as for whether or not there is evidence of what happens, whether the two environments are really different, I don't know.
Right.
And certainly there are ways of gaming it, the movie trope of, girls hiking their skirts up higher, despite the fact that it's part of a uniform is well understood. But
this next one is just a link. See here for a review of stats and studies on trans violence. And I did link it if I can figure out where it is. Oh boy. It's hard for me to navigate my computer in this form that we've currently got it because it's so tiny on my screen. But come on. So Zach, if you just want to show this very quickly, this is just someone I did not have an opportunity to look yet. Pseudonym on Medium, the transgender movement and bad stats, a debunking compilation. And my 10 seconds looking at it looks like exactly that. They have collected a bunch of these bad statistics, or these statistics that are commonly trotted out, like increased suicide rate for trans teens and such, and tried to drill down on them. And it looks like, for the most part, found no evidence. So that's good. I'm going to spend some time with that. Can you guys look into or address the Pfizer-Israel deal? From what I've seen, it looks like Pfizer is giving vaccine doses in exchange for Israel's patient data. Seems fishy. I don't know anything about this.
Yeah, I only know that Israel is supposedly a model in terms of its effectiveness at delivering vaccines. I believe I've read that, though. I didn't see this question coming, so I didn't look deeply into it.
Yeah.
But we could look into that.
Was Rachel Levine born a male? ? Yes.
Yes, but she was not born a man. Actually, I would point out, can you go back?
Which?
Yeah. Was Rachel Levine born a male? I would point out that a measure of the absurdity of where we have landed can be found, and I can't swear that this will be the same for you if you try it today as it was for me a few days ago when I went to Wikipedia. But if you look up Rachel Levine's history, it does not make any sense, because while it is obvious and acknowledged on the page that she is a transgender female, the page is written as if this was a revelation of a permanent internal state, which of course is an argument you could make, but it's not one that Wikipedia should be trafficking in. The fact is, this was somebody who lived as a male, was married as a male, had children as a male,
played football,
played
college
and then
football,
transitioned to female. And as it is with Chelsea Manning, and you might check out her Wikipedia page too, but there is also just a simple destruction of historical fact, where it is reported that Chelsea Manning gave classified information to WikiLeaks, which she did not. She was Bradley Manning at the time. And the fact is, the idea that somehow a site whose reason for being is to record factual information so that anybody can find it, that such a site should be doing anything other than reporting the actual facts, which is that Bradley Manning handed over the documents, was sentenced, transitioned while in prison, now is Chelsea Manning.
This is the part where they're just asking, we are being collectively gaslit. Rachel Levine's Wikipedia page, under personal life, she has 2 children, David and Dana. She transitioned in 2011. Levine and her ex-wife, Martha Peasley Levine, divorced in 2013.
And I believe it does not say.
That suggests. Now, it doesn't say genetic children. It doesn't say that Rachel is the genetic mother of the children, but their mother is listed here, the ex-wife. And, it's just not possible that 2 eggs got together and made these babies. That's not what happened. There was sperm involved, and it came from Rachel, which means Rachel is their dad and therefore was a man. That's just really basic biology. And the sentences that are written here don't come together.
They're written.
They don't work.
To obscure. It's gaslighting, as you say. They're written to obscure the truth. And in fact, we're looking at the page now. Rachel Levine is reported to have been born on October 28th, 67?
57.
57. So that's just factually inaccurate, right? And
it says Levine. It says Levine was born October 28th, 1957, and is originally from Wakefield, Massachusetts.
So, okay, again, constructed so as to create the ambiguity. No, I'm talking about over there. Anyway, I think it is there, but these things. Look, let's say.
Well, no, like where she trained in pediatrics. All of this.
Where she. If you go back into the career history and the early life, it doesn't add up. And we are expected to do the work on the user side of putting together what must have happened, and an obvious question like, when did Rachel Levine transition, which is just a simple factual question a journalist might want to answer, can't be established here.
The date is listed here separately from that WAPO article that I shared in the first hour from 2016. We are told that she won't say whether or not she's had surgery or is on any cross-sex hormones at all. And she has fathered 2 children. That's a pretty solid group of facts right there for me. Say, there is no way that I should be expected to refer to the person who was growing up and who had children and who trained as a pediatrician as if that person was a woman all along.
So
no.
To me, this is exactly parallel to if we attempted to erase the distinction for women who married and changed their names. If we pretended that when you married, you were simply fulfilling your destiny to be with this other person and adopt their name, and therefore you really had their name since you were born, and we obscured your maiden name, right?
Yeah.
It'd be exactly the same thing. And the answer is, we don't do that. Why not? Because it makes it really hard to figure out what happened. Oh, this person is the same as that person. Here's her maiden name. Right?
Also, as you acquire new identities, new truths about yourself, that does not change history.
Right.
This thing is about this movement, the activist part of this movement, and not all trans people, yes, true, 100%, is about obscuring history. There's a pretense here that by wishing it to be so, you can time travel and recreate things that already happened. History happens. It happens once. There is objective reality to it. Two different viewers on a particular scene can have different interpretations of it. But this person had children, genetic children, with a woman who gestated them and gave birth to them. I'm guessing at a few parts of that here.
Right.
Therefore, this person was male at the time.
But you shouldn't have to guess. Wikipedia has an early life and education, career. It should all be here. And Zach, can you put up your mom's screen here? So if you look on the right side of this Wikipedia page, it does say Rachel Levine was born October 28th, 1957. At the top, it says Rachel Levine, and then it says where she was born. So that is the same thing that they do with Chelsea Manning having delivered classified documents to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. It's not true.
Yeah.
So this has obviously become a corrosive influence on our ability even to figure out what basic facts are that should be completely uncontroversial. It is no threat to Rachel Levine's right to be Rachel Levine to acknowledge that she was born male.
Yeah.
Right? It's no threat. It's just simply a fact.
Yeah.
We're at just over 50 minutes.
Okay. There's just a few comments here that I want to get through before we switch to this hour. This one, actually, so Biden, quote, "We're going to crush the virus." Also Biden from January 22nd, quote, "There's nothing we can do to change the trajectory of the pandemic in the next several months." I feel like, so I get what the person who's writing this comment is doing. They're saying there's inconsistency on this very important topic. I do think that second part of that quote has been widely taken out of context. I believe, and I wouldn't know where to find it, and I only saw it once, and I was out in the world, and I was like looking at my phone, but that the full quotation from him has him sort of not slurring, but mumbling a little bit at first, where he says unless we can do something, then yada, 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 and there's nothing we can do to change the trajectory of the pandemic in the next several months. I believe that's what the actual full quote is. And if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but I think that this particular thing that I've seen a few times is an unfair assessment of what he's claiming.
Even as presented, those two things are not inconsistent. We are going to crush the virus doesn't say when. There's nothing we can do to change the trajectory of the pandemic in the next few months.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree. This is much ado about nothing.
Yeah. I might be in the minority, but I agree with Rand Paul on this one. I'm all for treating people with respect and dignity, but government coercion typically does way more harm than good in these areas. So this is going to be, I think this is going to be trans stuff again.
I think it's a general point, and I must say I don't know Rand Paul's position, but if it lines up with what's stated here, I am more or less in agreement, which is to say, forcing people to speak in a particular way is not an effective way of dealing with their bigotry. It's liable to make it worse.
Mm-hmm.
And that the successes we have had have not come from, wagging fingers at people.
Yeah.
They've come from structural reforms that have placed people in circumstances they couldn't have gotten to with, prior barriers. And then exposure does the heavy lifting.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, the idea that we're going to police speech into utopia is nonsense. Now, I will say somebody's going to take me to task for being such a stickler about the term theory versus hypothesis.
Is it going to be me?
No, I don't think so.
No.
But I accept that I am the only person who is exercised about this, at least at the level.
I care. I just don't think every moment is the time for the conversation.
We have a convenient example in the last week where a journalist who actually did a decent job of covering the lab leak hypothesis for CNET started with the title, and it's titles are sometimes written not by the author. In fact, often not written by the author.
Almost always.
But the title says the lab leak theory, and that terminology goes through the entire piece. And there's just this question about the the entire fact that we are now talking in rational terms about the lab leak possibility, the lab leak explanation, and whether or not it is correct, that is the result of very hard work on the part of people who have been very careful not to overstate the case. And in one piece of journalistic carelessness, a whole lot of good is going to be undone, because once again, we're now subject to the idea that we are conspiracy theorists, when in fact we had successfully shut down that false accusation by being careful. So anyway, I do think it's important. But in that case, it is not that we want to police people's language to make them better. It's that we want the language to actively reflect the rules of engagement. A hypothesis is different than a theory, right? If you disbelieve the theory of evolution, it's not always the time to talk about it, right? Because it is a theory. It is well established. And if you want to go to an evolution conference and have that battle, we don't have to listen. But when it comes to hypotheses, we know what the rules are, right? Yep. They're evidentiary rules. They're well established, and that's where we should be. So language matters, but policing people's language to make them change their moral stance is not going to work.
Awesome. Okay, 3 quick comments before we switch to this hour's question. 64, our friend Holly reminds us, is both a perfect square and a perfect cube. Swoons.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
4 cubed, 8 squared. Brilliant podcast as always. Greetings from Somerset, UK. Here's my door fee. Thank you for that. And I love every one of you and hope you all have a wonderful day today. Thank you for that as well.
Thank you so much.
And let me see where. All right. What is going on? So Zach, there we go. No, I know there's a line. I've lost control of I don't know what's going on. Okay. Why? Says the first question from this hour's questions. Why are women so much more likely to love horses than men? I work as an equine artist, and in 3 years I have never had a male client. I am also a horse-obsessed woman, so very intrigued. Thanks.
Thank you for clarifying.
As what?
Well, what did you say about equine artist?
Yes. So you thought it might have been a horse riding in?
Or someone who identified as one. But she clarifies that in the later part of the question. I'm glad to have it clarified so we don't have to wonder.
What a relief.
Yeah. All right.
It's gotten
that absurd.
It's gotten there. Yes, it's gotten there. We're almost 3 hours in. Okay.
Yeah. So, all right. Why are women and girls more likely to be fond of horses? And I do wonder if this was always the case. There may be, when horses were animals taken into battle.
Yeah.
Presumably, the relationship of men to their horses would have been different.
Yes.
So
certainly, Dothraki women don't have a particularly close relationship with the horses, it seems.
Yes, Dothraki women, to the extent
that they exist, which they don't.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, I don't have anything good on this. I mean, I guess I would like to know, in order to posit a hypothesis here, I'd like to know the history of how widespread it is. Like, is it just the U.S. or is it across the weird world? And how long ago? Does this start in the 50s in the U.S., sort of in post-war boom times? And I still don't have an answer off the top of my head if that's when it starts, but I don't, without knowing, is it a Victorian era thing? I think we need more information in order to get at it. I mean, on average, women and girls are more likely to be interested in systems that are human or animal, and men and boys are more likely to be interested in systems that are things, objects, numbers. So that doesn't get you anywhere close, really, except that you might predict if the horse girl, horse woman thing is real, that you would also find that girls are more driven to have a pet at home. right? That is similar. And, of course we have this trope of, a boy and his dog. And that presumably goes back farther into, into hunting times again. But that having an animal that you can love unequivocally and who loves you unequivocally back, but whom is not doing a job for you is a pretty novel circumstance, right? Like it's a total luxury to have the people wolves and epic tabby that we do, right? They serve no function but love and companionship.
Don't let them hear you.
I think they know. I think the dog anyway is actually perturbed by
Yes,
this. The
she'd
dog
like a
desperately
job.
would like to be functional, would like a job. The cats are quite happy the way things are. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. So I'm not sure we
No, we didn't.
got to an answer, but
And the next one from Echo, I quickly looked this up. Dune question is how it starts. I love Dune. I've only read the first book though. No, that's not true. I read the second book and it was so disappointing that I didn't read any of the rest. What's your take on chair dogs? Well, chair dogs weren't in either of the first two books, so I don't know. Feasible? Ethical? Same question about axolotl tanks and other. That's both tiny and probably in Dune language. Tilaxu something merch. P.S. Did you know that Herbert was into Jungian psychology? I did know that. Super interesting, weird guy. But then he's into a lot of weird stuff. Do you know anything about chair dogs?
no.
I don't. So that's two questions in a row we can't really answer. Sorry. Which of these do you believe has lifted more people around the world out of poverty? Capitalism, globalism, democracy, public education and safety nets, or the empowerment of women? Wow.
Yeah, I would say
I mean, some of them are contingent on others.
right. That's the problem is they're non-independent.
Yeah, they're non-independent. So, both public education and safety nets and the empowerment of women are probably inherently downstream of democracy and maybe of capitalism as well. I think I could take globalism off
Yes,
the list.
I would be tempted to as well. Although there's an argument to be made. On the other hand, it sort of forces you into define poverty.
Right.
Yeah. So.
And you need some amount of globalism for democracy here to spread over there, and thus give some education to women such that they can be empowered, and so that they can the birth rate can go down and they can accrue more wealth, etc.
Yeah.
So it's a good list, and even the one that I am most willing to say it's not that one has a role to play here. So more people around the world. I think it's a ranked list. I think you just can't do them independently.
Yep. And there's also the possibility that there are things on it that you really, the spirit of the question is completely inconsistent with the idea that things like war, famine, deadly pandemic diseases result in consequences that may be economically positive for those who survive these things. So
Right.
Anyway, wow is a complex question. And
none
of these things are independent.
The Black Death left a lot of open niches.
It left a lot of wealth on the surface and resulted in an increase in well-being for those who were around to participate in it.
And early on, most of them were in deep mourning, but they're those who survived left descendants who were better off largely. I've had some success waking up my mom and aunt to what is happening. However, my brother and his wife are frogs in the pot. Any advice on reaching them?
Get them to wear lapels. And no, that doesn't work.
You used to tell we had one student whom we adored and who was just hard to get to do what he needed to do, and you finally told me, tell him to just wear lapels
All the time.
And because we had this kind of relationship, I did, and I grabbed him by them. He was gigantic. He was like 6'6". Anyway, it didn't work. It still didn't work, but I got to grab him by the lapels.
Right.
Yeah. I think we need to know more about your brother and his wife, right? You've told us something that's important, which is that you are able to talk with some members of your family such that you can convey some truth and reality to them, and the scales may be beginning to fall from their eyes. awesome. That means that you have the wherewithal to make careful, nuanced, compassionate arguments with people, with whom you share a history and presumably love. Sibling relationships look all sorts of ways. And not knowing what your history with your brother is, it would even help to know, frankly, if you're the older brother or the younger brother, if you have other siblings, what the relationship with the wife is like, both yours and his. But absent any of those particulars, you got any approaches that he may not have thought of? This I'll fight you naked guy who has been able to successfully talk to other family members.
Well, I don't know. We don't get enough hate mail, so you could point them to the DarkHorse Podcast. There's always that approach. Yeah, I mean, look, there's a question about the time scale, right? And are you making headway, but it's slow enough that you don't register it? Can you make predictions about what's coming that are sufficiently careful that when the things that you think are going to come to pass do, and your brother has told you that he doesn't believe that they will, that he will recognize that there was something about your model that carried the truth?
And can he do that? Like, will he follow through on, oh, you predicted this? Wow, I didn't. I was sure that wouldn't come to pass, and you predicted it.
Yeah. So things along those lines.
Yeah. Love you guys. Wondering if you've ever heard of the Venus Project. Would love to hear your thoughts or pass it to Eric for his commentary. I have not.
No.
Nope.
I have not either.
From Texas, heading to Mount Hood among many of the other Oregon attractions in April. Cool. That aside, what do you think the future of Game B is? Gus.
Well, Gus, the thing is, Game B, you probably should look into. There's a couple of pieces on it. Jim Rutt has done some on his podcast. Rebel Wisdom has done a bit on Game B. My perspective is that Game B...
Hasn't Jordan written a couple of things on his Medium?
Jordan Hall?
Yes,
yeah. He has written
I think a couple of really good pieces.
But I would say this distills down to an understanding that once you see it is inescapable, right? That the structures that run civilization put us on a fatal trajectory, that they are very strong, but also fragile and not competitively superior. In other words, there is inferiority that against an honest competitor would result in Game A failing. Once you've seen that, then the question is not Game B itself. It's not an organization. It's not a particular plan. It's a recognition that something must come next, and that something can be what naturally emerges at the failure of what we've got, which is likely to be a disaster and maybe not a survivable one, or it can be something architected to succeed at what we value better than our current system does. And so the question is, how, it'd be great if there were 20, 40, 100 Game B projects targeted at figuring out what the next system looks like.
Yeah.
Only one needs to succeed. And the problem is there are too few of them. And the likelihood is we won't find the viable formulation in time. But the answer is, it's Game B or bust.
Yeah. And if you haven't looked at some of Jordan's stuff, I would just put this up briefly, Zach. Just on Medium, search on Jordan Hall, and you'll find some of his stuff. And looks like he hasn't published anything since July of last year. He's got The Rise and Fall of Networks, Defund and Redesign Everything. And his thinking is always very, very careful, reliably, and surprising. Okay. I'm so liberal. I not only believe in universal health care, but I think registered pets should be part of the package. Do you think the next big hurdle is proper rights for animals and the environment?
No. For the following reason. It's a very tough sell, and it is not obvious how you would properly value these things. On the other hand, if you say what matters is human well-being, and it's not living humans. It's as many humans as we can give, as liberated a life as we can provide them. The gift of a liberated human life being the ultimate thing that we have to offer. The planet has to be stabilized. In other words, our system has to become sustainable in order to provide an indefinitely large number of generations a world. If the world is being degraded every generation, then that's a short-term plan. If it is stable, that's an indefinitely long plan. That's the way to give that gift to the maximum number of humans. And if you recognize that that is a worthy goal, you will actually end up generating systems that protect the very values you're talking about without having to defend them independently, right? In other words, a world in which there are no more orcas is a degraded world. It's not a sustainable world, right? So do we need to award orcas status? In which case, how do we do it? I don't know. Do we want to say actually the value of orcas to humans is such that they must be protected? And therefore, we must evaluate policy relative to its ability to do that for human well-being purposes. That we can do.
I'm not sure about this. And I don't have an answer. I'm not sure.
I think the problem is if you try to implement any alternative plan, you'll discover why they don't work.
Yeah. It feels to me like this could, like what you're suggesting, and I know that you and I share the actual values and underlying goals, but it feels like that could be used to create a explicitly anthrocentric world in which only humans are considered of value. And there are those who actually really believe that we can live absent the world that the vast majority of us and our ancestors have grown up in.
Of course, but who are they to tell somebody 5 generations from now that a decision was made that they're not entitled to have orcas on their planet?
But then it feels to me that it's easier to defend the value of orcas in their own right than the value of orcas in my mind. Like what does me having like putting amenity value on orcas do? It's inherently unquantifiable.
Right, but the problem is I don't know that it's inherently unquantifiable. It's inherent that it will be arbitrary, which is part of the point.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my point is, look, I think we need to be free to drive Anopheles mosquitoes to extinction and not free to drive orcas to extinction.
Mm-hmm.
One can do that.
And not actually free to drive all mosquitoes to extinction either.
Right.
Anopheles being the genus of mosquitoes that vectors malaria, dengue, Zika, yellow fever, others.
Right. And so my point is, if we just take the simplifying assumption that what we are doing is trying to provide the maximally hospitable world for the maximum number of generations over which we can have an impact, we can do that calculation without having to reckon with the right of Anopheles mosquitoes to continue, which of course, if orcas do, then it's really an aesthetic choice to say that Anopheles mosquitoes don't. So my point is the reason to prefer this. I mean, I am
it's an aesthetic choice, or people have tried to do this on the basis of consciousness, on the basis of social structure,
right? And my point
length of life.
I can just hear the sound effect of the car accident that comes from each of these choices. The only one that doesn't result in that sound effect is to say, you know what? This is about human well-being, but it can't be about us living humans at the expense of future humans. It's about them every bit as much as it's about us. And to whatever degree we start degrading the planet so they get less of one, that's our screw up and we're not entitled to it.
I guess how though do we defend against the Elon Musks, the super powerful dudes who actually think that life on Mars would be a way for humans to live?
We don't. I mean, for one thing, Elon, it's a hard road. I hope you succeed. I'm not going. Red rocks are cool, maybe for a week, but Mars is going to be a very boring place. Even if you terraform Mars, it's going to be, you think Portland is bad because of the the ivy, Mars is going to
Let's
be.
take Ivy to Mars.
Yeah, Mars is going to be appalling, even terraformed,
Yeah.
right? That doesn't mean it wouldn't be beautiful, like to glimpse out a window. You could, but maybe you could. But if you did, the point is there's no richness to it because it's not a natural biological planet, or at least it hasn't been on in a very long time. So anyway, I'm not against Elon hedging our bets by getting something going on Mars. That's a good idea. I don't think it's anything to bank on. I would say the same thing about Eric's point about breaking the Einsteinian speed limit.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, cool, let's do that if we can, but I don't think anybody should be treating that as plan B.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, right?
Right.
Plan B has to be, how do we break this system from doing its destructive thing and replace it with a system that does not degrade the planet one generation to the next, right? That just simply, A, I believe it's philosophically robust, and B, I believe it is the one thing that we can say that is objective, sufficiently objective that we could actually pursue it. And bonus, I think all of the things that you want to come out of an attempt to grant nature rights or whatever fall out of that naturally, rather than having to be artificially erected on top of some unstable philosophical ground.
Maybe. I hear you. It makes me very nervous.
Sure.
Yeah.
We're in a predicament. You should be nervous.
Yeah. Well, this person writes a follow-up question saying, P.S. I have a koala skull if you were interested. Of course we're interested.
So
I
very
suspect
interested.
that they are illegal to take out of Australia. Are koalas CITES? So koalas
Yeah,
must be CITES
gotta be.
listed. So CITES stands for, I don't know. CITES stands for something. CITES is the set of international law that describes that's not it at all, that describes the level of protection of particular animals. CITES 1, 2, or 3, and species, how about that? It's coming up with something random. CITES stands for, it's not telling me. I don't even know. I don't know what it stands for. Anyway, if koalas are CITES listed, which I think they must be, you can't, it's probably legal to have them. People end up with skulls. But the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, it's an international agreement between governments, and it's good, and it actually does restrict illegal pet trade and such. And even if it's legal with permits to have them within a country, if your CITES listed at all, I think you can't transfer them across borders, which means that anything that appears to be anything like that is at risk of being searched and seized at the border. And anyway, it's a big mess. Of course we want a koala skull, but it's a huge, likely legal problem. Yeah. I don't know what this next question means. Do primates owe chiropterans something better than Cavendish? If so, should probably figure out preferred cultivars. Hope they're good for smoothies. It's Cavendish. Primates are primates.
Yeah.
Chiropterans are bats.
Not quite sure. You could look up Cavendish.
I could.
See if you...
My attempt to look up CITES was distinctly... that's going to come up with a bunch of different Cavendishes, so that's not really going to help.
Yes. Well, then I think the answer is an unequivocal yes.
Okay, excellent. Let's do maybe 3 more. Hi, Bret. Why are the meta-analyses done on implicit bias so rarely mentioned? All of them show negative results. And there's a link to something from Annual Review. Yeah, Bret, why?
Yeah.
Why are you ignoring the meta-analysis?
Well, I think for the same reason that we do all kinds of other shoddy things in order to advance policies that are not well supported by evidence.
Oh, wait, hold on. So, second part of this question. That link is from the latest published article on January 4th of this year. Quote, we conclude that much research effort is theoretically and empirically ill-suited to provide actionable evidence-based recommendations for reducing prejudice. Great quote.
Yeah, I mean, the whole landscape around this is so messed up. If implicit bias tests work, then we ought to be able to use them to test out of implicit bias training, right?
Yeah.
Implicit bias training is being wielded as a weapon, and the idea is, it is both necessary because it works and doesn't end, and you can't test out because it doesn't. Right. So, the whole thing is just logically inconsistent at a suspicious level.
Yes.
So I think the reason that they aren't mentioned is because that would be even more awkward than the inconsistencies that are already staring us in the face.
Yeah. Okay. Zach, what are we at? We must be well over an hour at this point. Okay. Maybe this is the one to end on. What do you guys think about shrooms? And do you know of any ways to sober up quickly? I've been high all day. I'm sorry. if you'd rather not be at this point, I'm sorry. No, I don't know. I don't know any way to sober up quickly.
To sober up quickly? No.
Yeah, just do steer away from mirrors and phones.
Yeah.
But
you're not alone. Yeah. You're not alone. It'll end soon.
Yeah, it always does. That's if it's a bad trip you're on, know that it will always end. It will, 100%. Find yourself a nice animal to hang out with. That often helps.
Yeah.
No, they're super interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I will say what I always say, which is great, but not recreational. Doesn't mean you can't have a great time, but these are very powerful tools, and they should be treated with respect, which means, among other things, pay very careful attention to the circumstances in which you do them. I would say circumstances of trust, circumstances that are thought-provoking, that allow you freedom to think quietly, engage, not engage. All those things are important.
In which you are, and you know that you are actually physically safe.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Maybe that's it.
Okay. Well.
So we will be back in a week once again. Right now, we're in the middle of the 48-hour Ask Your Question period on my Patreon for the private Q&A, which will happen not tomorrow, but next Sunday at 11 Pacific for a couple of hours. Join me there. Join Bret on his Patreon if you'd like access to either of his monthly conversations. Access the Discord server on either of them. We've got merchandise for sale somewhere. What is it called? Store. Can't find anything. Thank you. That was Zachary. Yep, that was Zachary, our producer, our 16-year-old son producer in the background, informing me of the URL, which is store.darkhorsepodcast.org. We may have something new soon there. Email the darkhorse.moderator@gmail.com for any logistical questions you've got. And enjoy your week. Get outside. Stay calm. Try to do the science rather than just trusting the experts.
Be well, and if you're tripping, it'll be over soon. I hope it was great.